I'm a relatively new DM and recently decided to try my hand out at running Cursor Strahd. One of our usual group didn't like the module, so they backed out, which means that we had a vacancy. I made the mistake of searching for a player online, and found one that sounded like they would be perfect for the group. He seemed really cool and had a great character idea involving a Dampier that escaped Strahd's clutches before he could be transformed into a full vampire. I thought it would meld well to the story, so I agreed that he could join. The problem is, when we joined voice chat, I found out he was actually a she. I planned on making this campaign violent and loaded with horror and action. I didn't want to have to tone it down in order to suit a more feminine preference, and I don't want my players getting distracted by romantic subplots and stuff. I tried hinting at this with the other players, but they don't really seem to understand the problem. This was posted to DM Academy, and is it bait? Very possibly. However, given what we've seen on this subreddit, it might not be entirely untruthful. This is a story from back in my first year of university. I was casual friends with a girl who was in a D&D campaign based around becoming the secret overlords of a town. It sounded really fun, and she invited me to join, so I did. I'd only played twice before this. Neckbeard is also part of this group. I did not know this, probably wouldn't have joined if I had known he was there. Basically, he was a pretentious asshole who genuinely looked down on anyone who hadn't read Lord of the Rings, The Silmarillion, and every piece of fantasy fiction that simped over a pure, young, virginal woman. Imagine a weeb, but for European fantasy. I come to the group in the DM's dorm and roll an elf ranger, and we get started. The group are going to murder a guild member of merchants when they find me sniping one in an alley as part of an assassination. They help me kill him, and I come to introduce my character. Neckbeard has other ideas.
I roll to attack the elf.
DM pauses, he looks confused. She just made your job easier, why do you—
I roll to attack. My character is racist towards elves.
Myself and this other girl share a look. She's been playing in this game for 3 months, and is also playing an elf. This is the first time this character trait has been mentioned. I think we need some context about that day, then. Myself and Neckbeard share a poetry seminar. His poems are long-form, non-rhyme essays of the beauty of women and the existence of fairies, which he genuinely believed in, by the way. He's made it entirely clear in class that he believes all poetry should be like his poetry. A quote I remember is,
"Poetry has moved beyond the primitive forms used back then."
So, I may have submitted a poem about this attitude and how it's garbage in sonnet form. Looking back on it, I think he may have taken offense. This other girl, original girl, in character, manages to get him to calm down enough so I can join the party. We go to the merchant's hall and kill everyone! However, Neckbeard has started tacking something onto the end of all his attacks.
While attacking, my barbarian rage sets in. My eyes glaze over, and I try to graze the elf with my attacks.
DM is looking really apologetic at this point, and has been doing this campaign for months, and Neckbeard keeps rolling a 15+. I keep getting hit. And no, I did not put enough points into strength and constitution. We get to the leader of the merchants, who turns out is a lich. I'm basically limping in, half dead at this point, and he keeps rolling persuasion on this other girl, original girl's druid, to not heal me because
we don't know whether or not she can be trusted.
Needless to say, the lich got a few good hits in. It's my first session, and I'm lying dead on the friggin' floor. But he is not finished yet. Oh no. He whips out an item he got from a necromancer a few sessions back. It's a half revive, half possession spell kind of thing, and decides to use it on my character's corpse. It works, and I really wish it hadn't. My character is now alive, and perfectly aware of what's going on. She can talk, and she's pissed off. Because he's put a spell on her that compels my character to do whatever the hell he wants, my character no longer has free will at all, and he's looking pretty leery at the concept. He looks at me.
That's a pretty interesting character to play.
Hell no, you Gimli-looking weirdo. I'm not playing a campaign where all my actions can be vetoed by a player, and I'm basically your pet. I didn't go back the next week. Good thing, too. Original girl told me he liked to use my character as a maid slash... Is this going to be an every Monday sort of occurrence? I'm seeing a pattern. Anyway, that's why I didn't play D&D for 2 years. TLDR, Neckbeard has a grudge over a poetry disagreement, kills my character, and turns her into a... This is one of those times where the DM just needs to say no. No, your character can't accidentally hit the ranger. No, your character can't literally another player character. That is ridiculous. I sympathize with DMs who cannot handle this kind of instigator, but there is a certain degree where you need to realize that this is crazy. The kind of things this guy was pulling were not okay from any perspective. Hope that the OP can find their way back into Dungeons & Dragons, and hopefully this time with a better group. Not a terrible horror story, but it still makes me think sometimes. I was a new D&D player who finally managed to find a group at my local high school gaming club. But there was a major problem. No one had dice. Seriously, not one D20. We used dice apps for our first games, but it wasn't the same. If only we had gone to Arcana Vault. Arcana Vault is the sponsor of today's video. They are a dice and TTRPG accessory company that make beautiful resin, acrylic, and metal dice, all for your gaming pleasure. Their dice sets are beautiful, and most importantly, they are affordable. Right now, a few of their dice sets are even under $10, and they're not shabby looking either. On top of that, if you're alright with a little bit of rolling of the dice yourself, you can get their Random Dice Mystery Pack, which contains a full set of 7 resin or acrylic dice, all matching of course, and these aren't just some knockoffs or some defective copies, no, these are their actual dice put into the bag. So if you want some new dice to add to your D&D game, head down into the description down below, find the affiliate link, and head over to Arcana Vault where you can pick up your own beautiful dice sets. As always, supporting our sponsors does support us. And without further ado, I'm going to turn back into an animated rat so that we can get back to the video. So I have been playing D&D for about a year now, and I've ran a few one-shots, and they all went really well. I've stuck with the same group for the whole time I've been playing, and they are fantastic. My group only likes doing one campaign at a time to keep everyone's focus on that one campaign, which we were fine with. But I was looking to further my DMing career with my first campaign. For a few months, I had been writing my own world based around Norse mythology because I am a nerd for that sort of stuff. While I was writing the campaign, I started university and met these two guys that seemed pretty cool. While in class, I brought up the topic of Dungeons & Dragons, and they both told me that they were in multiple campaigns that were always abandoned by the DM. I felt bad for them and wanted to give them the proper D&D experience, so I asked if they wanted to do a campaign with me, and they were immediately in. Fantastic. A month later, and I had everything set up. I invited one of my really good friends, who we'll call Dave, from my other D&D group, and the guys that I had asked to join. We'll call them John and Gary. I invited 2 other people who aren't that important to the story, but they were fantastic players and fantastic role players. So considering all the players were pretty new to it, I decided to do a session 0 to help them make their characters. I asked them to make some backstories, look through the races and classes to see what they liked, and I advised against magic users for their first characters, as sometimes it could be confusing for a newcomer. In hindsight, that probably wasn't a great decision on my part. Gary said he was going to play a dark elf rogue, and John said he was going to play a high elf monk. Gary was playing a very stereotypical edgelord, but I've read about my fair share of edgelords here, so I thought I'd be able to handle it. John had to keep asking me to help with the backstory, which initially was fine, but he couldn't think of anything on his own for his backstory. I essentially had to lay it out for him. Again, I didn't mind this too much, as he was new to the game. So, session 1 begins, and it starts in a tavern. I know, taverns are the most uninspired starting point, but I was relatively new to DMing, alright? I asked my buddy Dave if he could start as his character already in the tavern, as he was more comfortable with the game and good at roleplay. To my surprise, everyone meshed really well. Everyone sat down at the table together and hit it off right away, talking to Dave and my NPC, who would act as a guide for their very first quest. Then problem player Gary walked in, and Gary immediately goes to the corner, which is full of Vikings. He says, "Give me your table," and stabs his knife down the table. I'm starting to think to myself, you're in a tavern full of mead-fueled Vikings, but I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt because he was new and asked him to roll an intimidation check. Natural 20, thank God. The Vikings get up and move to another table. The rest of the party notices him do this, and they all join him at the table as a bit of comic relief. And the dynamic was actually really funny. Everyone was really upbeat and happy, and Gary, whose character was always angry, made for some fun dialogue. So after some dialogue, they are given their first quest, to investigate an abandoned mine to see what was lurking in there. This would act as a way to introduce the party to combat and some basic rules of Dungeons & Dragons. While walking to the mine, problem player Gary started arguing with one of the players in character, and tried to stab him in the shoulder. He got a nat 1, so I made him stumble and fall over, which the party found quite funny, except for Gary. He wasn't impressed at all. The party gets to the mine and completes their first combat encounter. It was a bit easy as I didn't balance it very well, but it got the point across for the tutorial. Gary asked if he could search the room for a book. I was a bit confused, but said sure. He rolled and found nothing. He then asked me out of character if I put his book in the game, and I said, "What book?" He said that his character was searching for a book with a text to help him find a sorcerer, but it was a very specific book that only he knew about. I said that he hadn't told me about this beforehand, and he insisted that he did. So I gave in and said he found a book, but the language was indecipherable. Bad decision on my part, but the mindset was that I'll add a character in that will decipher it later. Not a bad decision at all, by the way. That is a perfectly reasonable method to delay something that you haven't prepared. Better to delay than to do something early and have it be bad. That was a bumpy start, I thought, but it went relatively well. My friend Dave said that he was seeing red flags with Gary. I said just to give him some time. He'll get less edgy. Oh boy. So session 2 starts, and we continue from where we left off, which was them being tasked by a Norse god to complete a quest for him. They were all excited about it, and they set off on their adventure. So after about an hour of the session, I usually run sessions for about 4 hours by the way, with a break in between, I noticed John and Gary, our problem players, are getting bored. They aren't engaging with the rest of the team. I forgot to get this down, but we are playing this game online through Discord and Roll20. With Roll20, you can draw on the map, which can be a great feature. Unfortunately, this time, it did not go that way. I had planned for a mini-boss halfway through the session who guards a bridge, which was a large troll that would regenerate health every turn, but it wouldn't if it was set on fire. Interesting concept and a fun little puzzle/fight for the team. While I'm setting up the battle and getting all the sheets ready, well, I had Roll20 minimized at the time, and when I came back, John and Gary had scribbled all over the map with the marker tool which they had just discovered. This didn't bother me much as the group was waiting for me with my notes, but when the battles with the troll started, I had zoomed in the map to the part where the players and the troll were. While in battle, John and Gary were giggling to each other and not paying attention. When I asked them what their next move was, I zoomed out of the combat area and realized why they were giggling. They had scribbled all over the map with comedy on par with a 6-year-old drawing on a coloring book. I asked them nicely if they could stop doing that and, play the game. They apologized and said they wouldn't do it again. So I went back to the combat of the game. 5 minutes later, more giggling. They did the exact same thing again. I'm a bit annoyed at this point. I asked them nicely, "Guys, can you please stop doing that, please? It's ruining the immersion, and it's a little bit childish." I decided to end the session there because the rest of the party seemed a bit fed up as well. So they had defeated the troll, and I'd pick up from there. Session 3 is where I gave up. Everyone seemed ready to go again. I had the players meet some NPCs at a camp after the fight so they could have some roleplay as the last session was very combat heavy. All of the parties doing great, discussing their backstories, why they're here, what they want to do. It was a fun roleplay moment, but then there was Gary. He was looting the tents looking for another book, which he hadn't told me about doing beforehand for his backstory. So I put my foot down and said, "Sorry man, you have to consult me about backstory stuff beforehand so I can introduce it into the campaign and the story." He seemed a bit disappointed, but he was understanding. While talking to John and Gary again, they decided to draw and giggle, but this time I could see them actively doing it, and I said, "Guys, don't do this again, please. I've told you twice, come on." They were laughing about it and said, "Okay." It sort of broke everyone else's immersion for a few minutes. During combat, John and Gary kept drawing, so I just kept deleting them and gave up on asking them because I just wanted to keep the game moving. I could tell that everyone else was getting pretty annoyed, especially my friend Dave, who had told me beforehand he didn't like them much. So the climax of the session comes. The big reveal that the god they had taken the quest from had lied and used them as bait, and suddenly a huge serpent comes out of the water, the world serpent. This was supposed to be a moment of intensity and awe, and they were all about to die from this huge beast. But while I was reading out my notes on the serpent, John and Gary drew stupid faces on the serpent. I was infuriated at this point, but took a deep breath and asked them to stop. Not quite as nice this time. It went something like, "Guys, knock it off. It's just not funny." And after a few seconds, began reading the description again. The party was saved by an unknown force, which was another Norse god, but the party didn't see the NPC who was with them for the next 3 sessions because the world serpent had reduced the poor guy to a bloody pile. But while I'm doing this, John and Gary just scribble all over the scene again. I had enough. I ended the session early and said I was done because university was too much for me to handle along with D&D. Everyone was understandably disappointed, but understood. I felt bad for the rest of the party that were fantastic role players and did nothing wrong. Everyone moved on, but the whole game left me burnt out on D&D for a few months. Recently, during a lesson with me and John attending, my tutor was discussing D&D and how its world building is done. I said something about a class I like playing, and John said, and I quote,
All the games I've been in end up with the DM dropping the group.
I almost exploded at him. I haven't talked to John in a few months because he made me uncomfortable to be around, but that's a personal issue, unrelated to the story. Just know that we don't talk anymore. He essentially blamed me for the session stopping, which technically is correct, but the fact he had no self-awareness for the reason why I stopped the session, it was unbelievable. While I understand that the DM probably didn't want to cause any sort of controversy or waves in this university group of friends by saying, John and Gary ruined this game for me, I also understand that the other players must have been very disappointed. From what it seems, they enjoyed the game and were good at it. I think the OP should have been straightforward with them and honest as to why they don't want to play anymore. Now, this doesn't mean that the OP should have salvaged the game or just kicked John and Gary out. They probably were just generally burnt out. And if you're burnt out of D&D, then you don't want to play it, and I totally understand that. But you should be honest with your group as to why you stopped. Now, of course, this isn't the OP's fault. It's John and Gary's fault. Because, yeah, being immature, not engaging, and just generally being a dick while playing Dungeons & Dragons will absolutely ruin the experience. It's selfish and it's rude and it's bad. D&D isn't like doing an impromptu Smash tournament or Mario Kart tournament at your buddy's house. D&D requires a level of engagement. If all you're doing is drawing dick pics on the map, then, well, people aren't going to have a good time. Simple as that. When I started uni, I decided to join my local D&D group, keen to make new friends. I show up, get talked through character creation, and join up for an adventure. There's myself, 18-year-old female, the DM, and 3 players, including our problem player. The first warning sign was the outfit. I lived in the tropics with an average temperature of 30 degrees, and then this 16-year-old is wearing a leather trench coat and a fedora. I was the only female in the group, but hey, I was kind of expecting that sort of player ratio, and so far everyone has been really nice and welcoming, so it should be fine. Being female and boring, I chose to play a female character. Nothing wrong with that, by the way. Anyway, I don't even remember what the adventure was about now, but it was fun. Problem player would often talk over people and would get kind of rules lawyery, and he was very touchy with anyone else seeing his dice rolls, but whatever, I'm having a good time. The problems begin as our characters fall through a portal and the DM asks us to roll for fall damage.
OP shouldn't take fall damage, declares problem player. Her breasts would cushion her fall.
I chuckle awkwardly at this. No, breasts are pretty sensitive. They have, like, nerves and pain receptors and stuff, I reply. Now, a sensible person would probably just accept this. However, problem player was plagued with the inescapable desire to always be right. Somehow, this uncontroversial statement about my own anatomy spawned an argument, and there was nothing I or the people at the table could say to convince him that breasts are in fact part of the female body and can take damage. This argument seemed to go on, and in the end, I don't remember whether the DM made me roll damage or not, but at least the adventure was back on track. We fight the enemies the DM presents us with, and soon enough find ourselves back in the local tavern celebrating our success. An excellent first adventure despite the weirdness a little earlier, I think. Alas, the weirdness was not over.
I rolled to seduce OP's character,
says problem player. You can't seduce her, I say, not realizing that this is a gross overstepping of boundaries and looking for an excuse. You can't seduce her because my character already has a girlfriend. She's dating, the barmaid. I BS some background for my newly invented girlfriend, who I decide to name Beyonce because why not? Everyone shares a laugh over my naming choices, and we end the session. I go home thinking I had a good time, even though that kid, problem player, was kinda weird. Problem player proceeds to spend every moment of in-game downtime over a semester's worth of games, either trying to seduce my character or invite himself into a threesome. Eventually, he declared that Beyonce had cheated on my character with him, which, I'll be honest, I'm kinda still upset about. The rest of the members of the local game club were fine to play with, and I ended up making some great friends there. Still, it was pretty awkward having to actively avoid sitting near one of the club regulars for fear of having him try and hit on me and my character. Romeo, oh Romeo, how are you even a thing? we encounter yet another problem player who thinks Dungeons and Dragons is a viable route for flirtation. And let me tell you guys, 99.999% of the time, yeah, it's not. It reminds me of those stories of people who walk around cons, see a cosplayer in the distance, and decide that they are their one true love. I don't understand how people think like this, but they persist nonetheless. A few years ago, I was playing in a Pathfinder Skull and Shackles campaign. My character was the captain of our ship, and we had all had a really great time playing. All of us, except for one player, I'll call Mitch. Mitch was playing a fetchling knife master rogue, designed almost entirely around combat. That was fine, we had other characters, like mine, that were social focused, and we did run into a good bit of combat, both from encounters from the adventure path itself and from side quests the DM threw at us. Mitch was also a guy in his mid-30s and had been playing D&D and Pathfinder for a good 10 years. Mitch had one problem though. He hated it whenever another character outdamaged him in combat. If our swashbuckler had a crit streak and managed to take down more bad guys than he did, he would sulk after the game and swear the DM was out to get him. If his character snuck off and got into a mess and almost died, well again, the DM was out to get him there. He also hated that his character wasn't made captain, even though, you know, he had the charisma of a turnip. Just to keep him from complaining too much, we made his character first mate, mostly because the first mate didn't have much to specifically do on board ship, so he could do the least damage to the crew in that role. After several months of hearing him bellyache about how useless his character was, despite demolishing most monsters we encounter, and how much he'd be better at planning out things, I finally had enough. We knew of a treasure map owned by a wizard who happened to be out of town for a while, and we wanted to steal it. That was right up the alley of a sneaky rogue, right? I made a big show of letting Mitch's rogue plan out the heist, telling him he had all the resources of the ship and crew at his disposal. We had about 2 weeks in-game to plan and execute, and Mitch had a real-life week to plan, along with the whole pack of info from the DM about what he could see from outside the wizard's estate. There were no obvious ways into the estate other than the main gate, and there were a number of guards visible patrolling the grounds. Mitch complained for the entire week he had to plan about how unfair this situation was. There was no way in. The DM was making it too hard because he was the one planning it. Except the DM had planned out the adventure weeks prior with no way of knowing Mitch would be put in charge, and his character sucked, so he'd fail no matter what he did, even though he had the stealth high enough to sneak past gods. The next game night, the heist was on. Mitch decided to completely ignore all of the crew and all of the other PCs except our swashbuckler. His brilliant plan was to climb the wall. Just climb over the wall while the guards weren't looking in the dead of night. Actually, okay, sure. High stealth, high dexterity, high acrobatics characters sneaking in like that is certainly possible. They get over the wall, and now they are in the main courtyard of the estate. Mitch heads to the first building nearest to him, the guard barracks. He and the swashbuckler sneak inside and find guard uniforms in the entry vestibule. So far, so good. This is actually going better than we all expected. With the uniforms, they should be able to sneak into the main manor and get the treasure map. Easy peasy. Just maybe a disguise or stealth roll or two at most. But, oh no, Mitch, he has other plans. He cajoles the swashbuckler into sneaking into the actual barracks with him to slit the throats of all the guards sleeping there. The DM warned him that this could backfire. One missed stealth roll, and they could wake up a whole room of guards. But Mitch wouldn't be persuaded. He gets the swashbuckler to start on one end and he starts on the other, and they go about killing the sleeping guards. And after 2 guards, the swashbuckler rolls a natural 1 on her stealth roll. One of the guards stirs in his sleep, seeing the swashbuckler standing over his fellow guard with a dagger in her hand, and starts screaming when she cuts the guy's throat. Oh boy, now it's on! The swashbuckler runs from the room as quickly as she can, but gets caught by the guards rushing in from outside. She wisely chooses to surrender. Mitch, however, made it out first, and now is being chased by a group of guards. They begin flanking him, and archers begin firing on him as he nears the walls. He wants to try and jump over the wall, the 20-foot-high wall that he used a rope and grappling hook to go over initially. Nope, that's not happening. He is now backed up against the wall, facing 24 very angry guards and 12 archers, all trained on him. Well, I guess my character dies, he says. No, you can survive. You just need to roleplay this out. Okay, Mitch replies. What do I roll for that? Everyone at the table goes silent and looks at Mitch. He's holding a d20 in his hands. We all burst out laughing, everyone but Mitch, of course, who thinks we're all being unfair and laughing at him. We were, but still. Do I roll diplomacy or something? I mean, man, it depends on what you say, the DM explains. What are you saying to these angry folks with spears and bows pointed at you? I don't know! Can't I just roll? No, I don't know what you'd roll unless you tell me how you're trying to get out of this. The DM is trying to be patient, but he's gotten tired of Micah's constant whining too. Which one's best for this, he says. The DM shakes his head. No, you need to, tell me how you're convincing the guards not to kill you. Well, I guess my character just dies then, Mitch says, sulking. We all look at him, everyone being quiet because we've all gotten tired of this complaining too. The DM sighs. Look, can't you just tell me what you want your character to do? I want to climb the wall, Mitch says. The DM shakes his head. You're being unfair! You can't climb up. They would just spear you from behind anyway. You have to, roleplay this out, the DM says again. I don't know how to roll for that, Mitch says. And now he's getting testy, and the rest of us about to step in when he says, I take out my knife and slash my own throat so they don't get me. Everyone stops. The DM looks at him. Are you sure that's what you want to do? It's clearly the only thing I can do, he snaps back. The DM sighs, looks at all of us, and continues on. Alright, you slash your own throat. As a knife master, you know where to cut. As you bleed out, the guards look at you with a mix of horror and revulsion, confused why you wouldn't even try to just surrender to them. Mitch just gets up from the table, takes his stuff, and leaves. Over the course of the next week, he complains on our group chat that the DM, who was not on the chat, had it out for him, and made the entire situation and scenario impossible. We all tried to explain to him that the swashbuckler survived. She surrendered and was put in the estate's dungeon, and we were all going to rescue her next game. Mitch repeatedly claimed the DM gave him no way out and no options. Eventually, we just let him rant for a few days and waited for him to roll up a new character. An almost carbon copy of his previous character. His new character is introduced next game session, and the first thing he asks is if he can have his old character's gear and money. Of course. While the prospect of rolling to roleplay is funny, I do sympathize for people who aren't sure how to talk in character. However, that doesn't extend to what this guy was doing. What this guy was doing was just not caring. Look, when you're playing Dungeons & Dragons, like I've said many times, it requires a little bit of engagement. The players are all showing up and trying to tell a story together with a DM who has spent hours prepping this game. If somebody shows up and puts zero effort into trying to make the game work, it does kind of bug me as a DM. It feels crappy. I've spent hours prepping this, and you come to the table and just half-heartedly roll dice without caring about myself as the DM, or the story, or, most importantly, your fellow players. This guy had every opportunity to get out of this situation. His player agency was not taken away by this DM. The DM gave him multiple opportunities to get out, a clear avenue, even illustrated by the swashbuckler who had surrendered moments earlier. If he had just followed her example, his character would be alive. And then, of course, crap-talking your DM behind their back, not cool ever. This doesn't feel like an experience in role-playing. This feels like somebody who just doesn't care, and that is a real shame. Alright, and that is all the stories that I have for you today. If you guys enjoyed this episode of RPG Horror Stories and want to let me know, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then please check out Tabletop Tavern Tips, where I have tons of DM and player advice about Dungeons & Dragons, all for your viewing pleasure. And while you're there, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content right as it comes out. Finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment seduction to let me know you made it to the end of the video. The Witch Queen is going to be upon us tomorrow, so I've got to get ready for that. But yeah, in essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.